Pokolenia z Barcelony, dia Szysztik, Nasztik, Polski, Przyjaciół. Nazywam się Clewett i jestem autorem 3G Pokolenia. Unfortunately, I don't speak Polish, so I hope you'll bear with my English and be able to follow these subtitles in your wonderful language. For the next 25 minutes or so, I'm going to tell you about this book, why I wrote it, and why it may be one of the most important things you read this year. We're going to take a journey together. We're going to go through history, through the Bible, and through our own experience to answer this question. How do we transmit our values, your values, the most important things we own? How do we pass them on to next generations? Be sure to have your notepad, computer, or mobile device handy. You'll want to take some notes. I'll give you just a moment to get these things ready. And now a question. Take a quick look in your pockets. That's right, your pockets. Do you find any pearls there? What? Pearls. Yes, pearls. Something like these. As you probably know, pearls are an oyster's reaction to irritating or hard things. If a grain of sand enters the oyster shell, it secretes a smooth, shiny covering, layer upon layer, until a beautiful pearl is formed. To me, that's a lot like our values. Every one of us has learned lessons about life, often the hard way. Maybe your parents told you it was good to be honest, or you understood from spiritual leaders that we should forgive. But not until we tell a few lies and get caught, or until we have broken relationships as a result of unforgiveness. Then these good ideas become our values. Values, then, are good ideas that have been tried by the hard circumstances of life. They are hard-earned lessons. Like pearls, they're extremely valuable and the most precious possession that you can pass on to students, co-workers, sons and daughters, your second generation. Now look again. Do you have any of these pearls in your pockets? I think you do. And the question again is, how do we pass on these values, these pearls, to those who love and we influence around us? And can we pass them on to our second generation in such a way that they can be passed on to a third generation? That's why this book is titled 3G, 3 generations. Is it possible to pass on your most important values to a second, to a third, and maybe even a fourth generation? We'll answer that by first giving you a challenge. Second, by telling you a sad story. And third, by giving you some sweaty encouragement. Here comes the challenge. Are you ready? How many of you use a calendar or agenda to write down your appointments? If you're watching this in a group, raise your hand. If you're by yourself, quickly go and get your calendar or open your mobile phone now. That's all right. Here is the challenge. How many of you have at least 2 appointments scheduled, let me check mine here, scheduled for next week? Good. How many of you have at least 2 appointments scheduled for next month? I can see a few of you through the screen. How about for next year? How about for next decade? How many of you have appointments scheduled 10 years in advance? All right. How about for the next century? You know, in all our seminars around the world, no one has had appointments scheduled for next century except for one. The scriptures tell us that God has quite a few appointments for us now in the next decade. He has appointments next century and even beyond that. And he talks a lot about generations. Let's take a look at his perspective. In Psalms 145:4, the Bible tells us that one generation shall praise your works to another. And then in Deuteronomy 23:8, God speaks about favor available to the third generation. That is, the grandchildren of faithful men. And then he also talks about things that will happen to the third and the fourth generation. And then a curse upon up to the 10th generation on the sons of Ammon because of how they treated God and his chosen people. Can you imagine that? 200 years of problems in the future because of wrong decisions made by their fathers. Yet God's calendar goes on, saying that his kindness endures to 1,000 generations and that his commandments are for all generations. Wow! Does that really mean that the decisions you and I make today could affect people long after we're gone? Yes, it does. And if we really believe that, would it affect the way we live and act today? Yes, it will. Let's look at one other scripture that spells this out clearly. In Joel chapter 1, verse 3, we read about God's plan for the generations. Could you do me a great favor and read this out loud wherever you are? My Polish would be a bit embarrassing, and I want you to get this deep in your soul. Are you ready? On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Opowiedzcie o lim swoim. Did you see that? Here God's command is that we, the first generation, tell his commandments to our children, the second generation, so that they can tell their children, the third generation, and the third generation should pass it on to their children, the fourth generations. 4 generations. This is our job. This is his model to keep his way and his word alive on the earth. And please note this. It's a commandment, not a suggestion. When heaven looks down on our life, God doesn't just see our lives, but also what we receive from our fathers and how we live that out, and then how we leave a legacy to future generations, and it's a command. I'd like you to consider for a moment this picture. Does anyone know who this is? This is actually my family. My brother found this old photo which shows 4 generations of Clewetts shot in 1862. In the right-hand side, the little baby is my grandfather, and holding him is my great-grandmother. The couple seated is my great-great-grandfather Ebenezer Clewett and his lovely wife, and the lady on the right is my great-great-great-grandmother. Apparently they didn't believe in smiling when they took pictures back in those days. But can you see the resemblance? Now that was a long time ago, and I can't tell you what were the values of Ebenezer Clewett and his family. But what would it be like if a set of important values were able to be passed down through 3 and even 4 generations, like you see in this picture? Abraham was called out by God and developed an unshakable faith in him. He had a son whose name was Isaac. Isaac received this faith and observed his father's actions in difficult times, like nearly being sacrificed on Mount Moriah. Isaac had 2 sons. One we know most about was Jacob. Also somehow received this rock-solid faith, a pearl of great price. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, 3 generations. Who was Jacob's son who became a world ruler? The 4th generation. You know the answer. Joseph. Many of you, I'm sure, know the story. I would like you to imagine for a moment that you were Joseph. I've tried this, and I don't think I would have reacted the way he did. Sold by his brothers to desert traders, and sold again as a slave in Egypt, falsely accused by his master's wife, and finally put in jail for a crime he didn't commit. I wonder how you would react in that situation. Would it be, "Oh God, thank you for your care over me. I trust you and believe in you"? Or would it be more like, "God, where are you? Where are you? What did you do? How can you treat me like this? How can I believe in you when you leave me in a place like this?" Joseph had heard the stories about his great-grandfather Abraham around the fire on those cold winter nights. He knew that Jehovah had found a wife for his grandfather Isaac and miraculously preserved the life of his father Jacob. On this foundation of 3 generations, Joseph was ready to become the leader of Egypt and all the Middle East immediately after stepping out of jail. Wow! Should this earth last another 100 years, how would you like your great-grandchildren to have the confidence to become world changers? If you're a teacher or business leader, how would you like to have your students and co-workers carry those pearls in your pockets with them, to own the faith and truths that mark your life in such a way that they can pass them on to the next generation and to the next and to the next? We're going to look at how to do exactly that in a moment. But first we're going to take a break and let you process a little of what you've heard so far. Your local coordinator is going to place you into virtual rooms so you can share together with a few others. You will have a chance to meet some new people. And I would like you and your groups to do 2 things. First, introduce yourselves, starting with the person who has the darkest hair. It won't be me. Tell your name and the group you or church that you belong to or the city you are in. Then, in the same order, answer these 2 questions. What has impacted you most about what you heard so far? Each person, briefly, in a minute, no more than 2 minutes, describe your reaction to something you heard that was interesting to you in this video. Second question, what is one of you or your family's values that you would like to pass on to your 2nd and 3rd generations? That is, what is something you have learned about life that you most want people in your family or influenced by you to do when you're gone? Are you ready? Let's continue. We said that everyone, from youth and singles to marrieds and grandparents, have pearls in your pockets. Lessons learned, values you can pass on. We've seen through Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph how overcoming faith can be passed on through 3 generations. We call that 3G, to produce a world-changing 4th generation. Now, what's the secret to keeping this commandment, to passing on His commandments from generation to generation? The key lies in a part of the Bible we often skip over. Let's look together at Deuteronomy 6, verses 6 through 8. And would you once again read this out loud together in your language? Are you ready? Raz, dwa, trzy. Niech te słowa... Let's ask this scripture 2 questions. First, what? What is God saying to us here? He's telling us to talk, but about what? About His commandments. Okay, don't we already do that in church and Sunday school and in youth camps? But now let's ask a second question. When? When should we talk about God's commandments, His character, and His plan for our lives? Take a look at this. When you lie down, when you rise up, when you go out, and when you come in. How many of you rose up this morning? Okay, some of you may still be a little sleepy, but you did get up, right? Now, during times of coronavirus, perhaps not everyone has gone out and come back in. But aren't these the most common things we do in life? Church, schools, and meetings are important supports, but the key time and place of value transfer happens in moments during the day. We call them teachable moments. Opportunities when, for some reason, the heart and mind of the next generation is open to discuss deeper things, to understand the why behind what we do. Now here's a typical example of a teachable moment. A busy working mother is too tired to cook tonight. She's on the phone ordering pizza to go when her 6-year-old begins pulling on her apron. Mom! Not now, honey. Mom! Oh, please, double cheese, pepperoni, come as fast as you can. Mom! What is it? Where do babies come from? Oh my, that is a teachable moment. They often happen when we least expect it, when we're tired and mostly unprepared. But you know, the next few words from that mom will influence forever the life of that young questioner. In past generations, teachable moments were more natural. They happened while dad and son were fixing the car or mom and daughter were baking cakes. The family mealtime was often the opportune moment to process the day and detect changes of mood or key disappointments. However, in the 21st century, you and I are facing unique challenges against these teachable moments. Does this scene look familiar to you? During this last year, we've traveled from New York to Hong Kong, Costa Rica to Senegal in Africa, sharing this same material. In every nation and culture, parents and leaders are facing this same dilemma. With often two parents working, social networks and online connections are replacing these personal and unscripted moments together. For many of us, these last few months of being forced to live in close quarters with family members during the quarantine, it's been a wake-up call. Although at times awkward, this time of being locked in together has forced us to have conversations and some teachable moments, perhaps. But what will happen when all these restrictions are lifted? Will your personal connections with family and co-workers go back to normal? Or will you recognize the threat and decide to do something about it? That is the challenge. And now, the sad story. We begin with a question. Why did the children of Israel ask for a king when Samuel died? Perhaps you know the story. Samuel, a monumental figure of the Old Testament, a prophet, he had led Israel all of his life. Before he died, the people came and asked him for a king instead of following after his prophetic line. Why? The answer? Many would say because they wanted to be like other nations around them. And this is partly true. But let's take a closer look here in the book of 1 Samuel, chapter 8, verses 3 through 5. I'll read it this time, but please follow closely the words in your language. His sons, however, did not walk in Samuel's ways, but turned aside after dishonest gain, and took bribes, and perverted justice. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together, and they came to Samuel at Ramah, and look what they said to him. Behold, you, Samuel, have grown old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint for us a king to judge us like all the other nations. Did you see that? What was the reason they asked for a king? Because Samuel's sons were a disaster. Consider this. Samuel was one of the best. He was an amazing example of leadership, integrity, and faith. And yet apparently he was so busy taking care of other people's needs that he neglected the needs of his own family, his own second generation. Everything he had worked for all his life was gone at his death. Will that be the end of the story for you and I? One of the key reasons for writing this book, 3G, happened while my family and I were traveling through the United States a number of years ago. We heard one too many stories of a good family whose children had gone bad. Some friends told us the story of their son, a promising young man who at 18 years old had chosen to not just leave the church, but leave his faith and reject most of the values of his parents. Drugs, live-in girlfriends, you know the story. It honestly scared me. The parents were more spiritual and probably better people than we were. It scared me enough that we literally stopped our van by the side of the road, locked the doors, and we declared a family meeting with our 3 children at the time. All right, you guys, you have just heard this story about one of your friends. What's going on with you guys? Anybody into drugs? No, Dad. What about your faith? Do you still believe in God? Yes, Dad. We still enjoy going on mission trips. We're still keeping the faith. And then I said, what have we done or not done that has allowed you to avoid the path of destruction of most of your friends, even those who are pastors' kids and missionaries' kids? At this point, I was waiting for some kind of parental pat on the back. You know, you told us stories, you gave us lots of hugs. Instead, my oldest daughter said, and I quote, "Family vacations." What? Family vacations? I certainly wasn't expecting that. Can you explain? I asked. Well, she said, when we're on vacations together and you're not looking at your watch expecting the next appointment, and we're the center of attention, you tell the same silly stories about your family and childhood, but we also gain a little more identity and security in who we are as a Clewett, my last name. I didn't know how to answer, but that conversation was a catalyst for researching how do values truly pass from one generation to another. I've since discovered that the first and perhaps most important principle is spending time together, experiencing life together. Unfortunately, our current hyperspeed culture runs counter to this principle. Do we need to reconsider our agenda, our yearly calendar, to intentionally make space for these kinds of teachable moments? After finishing the draft of this book, I remember talking to the leader of our mission in Spain and asking him when was the last time he took a vacation with his family. "Oh, I don't take vacations," he said. "There are just too many important ministries going on. Our kids help us out on occasion, but I really don't have time or money to go on trips not related to my ministry." You, and watch this, are sinning against your family, I told him to his face. It was harsh, but true. Fortunately, he made a key decision that year. You can read his testimony in 3G. His kids also made a distinct change in life direction in following years. I'll leave you with one important question before we go on. When you reach the end of your days, which is more important, that you had an amazing career or an amazing family? An amazing business or an amazing influence on your coworkers? All right, we've given you a challenge, we've told you a sad story, now it's time for some sweaty encouragement. In the Catalonia region of Spain, where we live, we have a unique cultural tradition called the Castellers, or human castle builders. We became part of the Casteller Club of Barcelona in 1992, as you see in this picture. And here is an example of what they do. The formations are intricate and precise, requiring absolutely equal pressure from all sides to support the tower as it goes up to as many as 10 levels high. Each level has increasingly smaller people until children occupy the top positions. My son was 8 years old and just the right size and shape to be on the top levels in 1992. In fact, we were actually in the opening ceremony in the Barcelona Olympics of that year. For 5 seconds, 1 billion people saw the back of my head on the bottom level. My 5 seconds of glory. Anyway, the Castellers are an excellent illustration of everything we've been talking about. From sturdy mill workers on the bottom to little children on the top, each level represents a new generation standing on the shoulders of the previous one. And rather than just telling you about it, let me take you with me to Catalonia to experience a recent Casteller castle building. The language you'll hear them speaking is Catalan, the language of our region. It's different from Spanish.
El 2011, el 2012 i el 2015. L'any passat van carregar-ne totes dues al concurs de castells de Tarragona. I avui el volen portar i descarregar en aquesta diada de Sant Fèlix, el castell total, el castell màxim, aquest castell, la bèstia indomable, com es coneix en l'argot popular casteller. Vinga, col·loquen el pis de quars d'aquesta construcció, ells l'acabaran de validar, acabaran de veure com estan les posicions. També hi ha un canvi destacat en el pis de quarts d'aquest castell. Els 15 comencen a pujar, el Toni Bach l'ha vist bé, per tant intent vàlid de la torre de 8 sense folre dels castellers de Vilafranca. Un altre moment per a la història en aquesta jornada castellera. És el tercer castell sense folre dels grans que veiem en aquesta jornada. Col·loquen ja el pis de 15. Aquesta pes important, aquesta consistència del pis de terç i també un pis de quarts gran dels castellers de Vilafranca. 15 col·locats, és una torre molt alta.
Vinga, la Marta i la Núria col·locades, està maca, va.
L'entrada del pis de dosos. El pis de dosos comencen a pujar i també serà important la pujada de la canalla, que puja a seguir dels dosos. Volen que el castell sigui ràpid. Vinga, atenció, els dosos ja, que aniran a col·locar-se en el seu lloc, tot just per sobre del pis.
Vinga, dosos, ben finets aquí dalt.
Entren dosos.
Està bé, Carles i Xaio,
té un cert moviment de dreta i esquerra que s'hauria d'anar parant. Vinga, som-hi. Dosos col·locats, cassoletes ja sobre el pis de 15. Vinga, som-hi. Comença a pujar l'enxaneta. Vinga, que la porten bé. Atenció, que entra la cassoleta. Cassoleta que es col·locarà. Som-hi, vinga, cassoleta col·locada. L'enxaneta que va fent via. Atenció, l'enxaneta que va fent via. Cassoleta col·locada. Enxaneta 3 cops de peu. Vinga, som-hi, ja és alt. A punt d'anar a carregar la torre de 8. Vinga, som-hi verds, som-hi verds. Som-hi verds, torre de 8. Carregada dels castellers de Vilafranca. Comença la baixada. Tranquils, que va bé. A veure, el pis de 15 està tranquil, l'enxaneta fa via, l'aixecadora fa via, la cassoleta surt, la poden descarregar, sortiran dosos, la tenen per descarregar, surten dosos, la tenen, la veurem descarregada, sí senyor, els 15 surten, ja la tenen, torre de 8 descarregada per Sant Fèlix, Sant Fèlix 2012, Sant Fèlix 2017, a la plaça de la Vila, en aquesta gran jornada, els castellers de Vilafranca descarreguen la 7a de la seva història. Impressionant, Cugat, quin castellers.
És el més difícil que hi ha. Això és l'espectacle més gran. L'espectacle més gran del món és descarregar la torre de 8 sense folre. En la pujada amb alguna brandada lateral que semblava que augurava algun perill, però realment amb tot a dalt s'hi patien pels 15, s'hi patien per...
Wow, isn't that amazing? Now, just before we close our time together, I'm going to ask you to do one more thing. Very briefly, we're going to put you into the same groups as before, and I'd like you to just react to this video you just saw. What impacted you? Where did you see yourself in this human tower? When you're done, we'll get together for one last word. I wish I could hear from each group. This video still moves me when I remember what it was like. Everyone working together from oldest to youngest, the kids on top thinking, we did it, we did it. Not always recognizing the organization and hard work of everyone below them. I hope that this illustration has been an encouragement to you. So you've received a challenge, you've heard a sad story, and now been given some encouragement. How will you respond to what you've seen and heard? Will this be simply a good message that you may remember years later? Or will this be a key moment of reflection and change in your lifestyle? The choice is yours. In closing, I'm so grateful to be able to offer you now this book in Polish. It contains many more practical tools and principles to help you live a truly 3G, three-generation lifestyle. And thanks to Greg Skwarbaczek, King's Kids Poland, and Sarun Publishing, if you don't already have it, you can now get this book at most of your favorite outlets in Poland as well as on Amazon. It's been a pleasure to share with you. I'll leave you with one last thought, and do widzenia.